Hey guys, it's been too long. I just could not wait to share my thoughts on The Shining by Stephen King. The Shining was Stephen King's third book after the massive success of its predecessors being Carrie and Salem's Lot. People had high expectations for this one, and I'd comfortably say that he delivered. This might be his second most famous novel, it being his most famous, there's just no denying that. People think Stephen King, people think it. And The Shining is important, and it's definitely the second thing that people think of when they think Stephen King. And it is really good. So let's talk about it. So this edition of The Shining is 497 pages. It's a little shorter than Salem's Lot, I believe, but it still isn't small. And I'd say, especially regarding these editions, that 500 pages is about Stephen King's average length of his books. And most books he writes are around this mark, some are a little shorter, some are a little longer. Anyway, I've read this book twice now, and both times I felt like it was just a little bloated. I love his books to death, and I can rarely find many faults, but the only faults that I really find, if you go back and look at some of my other reviews, it's that some of his books have bloat to them. Like, sometimes it just rambles on a little too long. And some of his longer books drag on, heck, some even of his shorter books drag on a little bit. And that's one complaint that I have about Stephen King, but it's a pretty minor complaint, to be perfectly honest. But unlike those other books where I feel that they could easily be chopped down just a little bit, I don't think that The Shining should be chopped down at all in hindsight. I think everything kind of is there for a reason, and it makes sense why it's there, and it all plays well into the final product, even if reading it is a bit slow. I'd say between page 30 and page 200 of this book, I'd say it's a little too slow, and it's just doesn't seem right. But by the time I get to the end of the book, I'm like, actually, you know, I'm kind of glad it's that slow. I feel like I needed it all. Which, it's a hard thing to explain, actually, because so many times you're like, oh yeah, this part could go, this part could go. Whereas this book, you're like, actually, what part would I get rid of? And to be fair, it builds up to a really awesome climax. And I just talked about the pacing then. Normally I talk about that stuff a little bit later. So it's a little bit out of usual, a little bit out of order than usual. So let's see what this book is about. So I think most people will know the premise of The Shining in some way. The Torrance families, Jack, Wendy, and Danny, travel to the isolated mountains in Colorado during the winter since Jack landed a job as the winter caretaker at that hotel. And fortunately, by the time they get there and they're all locked in for the winter, their young son Danny, who has a peculiar psychic ability known as the Shining, realizes the hotel is haunted and they're stuck in there with a bunch of ghosts and there is no way out. So it's a really strong premise that I'm not going to say too much about, even though I shouldn't have to worry about spoilers too much in this video. I'm still not going to spoil it just because it's the way I do things, but very famous story. Most people have gotten the story through the movie. A lot of people have also gotten it through both the movie and the book, so yeah. The Torrance family is great. They are so classic, and all three of its members are just so deep and interesting to read about. Jack, the father, is a recovering alcoholic who tries really hard to serve his family, and you really go deep into his psyche, which I love. Wendy is a very strong woman. She helps Jack through his alcoholic troubles while also taking good care of Danny. And Danny, speaking of Danny, this young man is a fucking terrific character. His strange and titular energy that runs through him, allowing him to vaguely see many things past, present, and future is so... God, it is just so interesting to read about. And I just can't get enough of just Danny just like, you know, just seeing some weird shit. And you're like, well, what the hell is going on? What the hell has happened here? What the hell is going to happen? It's so good. Every single one of these characters is so intriguing, and I just cannot get enough of them. This is a really creepy book too. I wouldn't say that it's his most terrifying, but it is certainly very creepy and filled to the brim with eeriness. And this brings to me one of my favourite parts of the book, the atmosphere of the hotel. This is one of those books when you're reading it and everything comes to your head so clearly. You can picture everything so well, and you can really imagine the creepy sounds of the elevators running in the middle of the night to old music coming from the ballroom or the Colorado Lounge, or I'm getting mixed up. I can't remember if the ballroom's in the book or not. But anyway, you know what I mean. And it's so atmospheric, and I really love when a book makes you feel like you're there. Now, as great as this book is, I do have a few issues with it. And that's why it's not one of my all-time favorite Stephen King books. And I'm going to discuss them now. And I know I said earlier that I was going to be trying to avoid spoilers, but, you know, I feel like I kind of need to do some spoilers just to talk about my exact problems, just especially with this book. It's just the way it pans out. So if you don't like spoilers, just dip out. But you probably already know the story. Again, you've probably seen the movie or read the book, or you know kind of what happens. And I'm gonna let my cat out of my room now because she's just really, really demanding to be let out. First off, I feel like whenever the Torrance family makes connection with the outside world, whether that being driving down to Sidewinder, or just any time that they manage to get out of the Overlook Hotel during the bulk of the book, all dread and tension and atmosphere is just lost. Now, this is only more towards the start of the book, probably more like, in the first half of the book that this happens, but it bothers me when it's building up so much tension and it's done so well, and then they just leave and go down to Sidewinder or something like that. Everything just feels, it just takes a completely different feel, and it's very interruptive. Jack is often talking to an old Alco friend of his who is honestly a real nothing of a character, and whenever he comes up or Jack rings him and talks with him on the phone for like forever, it's just a bit of a drag, and it's frustrating because they're talking with people outside. And I just don't like that. I don't like that at all. And also, near the start of the book, well, not near the very start, but there is a chapter, like, probably on like page 150 or something like that, that's all to do with hotel backstory. And look, I don't mind backstory, but the way this was done was really boring. It kind of turned into an epistolary kind of style where there's like, newspaper articles and stuff, and it just straight up wasn't interesting. Again, it just kind of like, just went off on its own thing. That the history never really played back into the hotel. It never really come back into the book in any way. It kind of just, okay, this is what happened, and then it's never mentioned again. None of the creepy shit that happens later on in the book ties back to the backstory that we're given in any way, and I just find that a little strange. And this might be a bit of a hot take, but the Shining ability that Danny has, doesn't always, but sometimes it feels a little overpowered, a little broken, a little repetitive. It just gets a little bit tiring. Danny thinks that something is going to happen, or he learns that something has happened. We, as the readers, see that thing has actually happened or does actually happen, repeat. Well, it doesn't ruin the story. There were certainly a few moments where I kind of just lost curiosity because I was like, I was being told what was happening before it actually happened. So when the creepy stuff actually did happen, sometimes it just wasn't a surprise. And I think that's what made it a little slow for me too. And I'm really not a fan of the epilogue here. It just takes me out of the darkness and the twistedness of the other parts of the story, and instead of ending on like, a really dark and scary finale, well, obviously the climax is really creepy, which is great, but then it just kind of like, it finishes on a fairly unnecessary final chapter, and I didn't like that at all. The Shining gets an 82% from me. Yes, it has its flaws, and I've acknowledged them today, but I'm really glad to have finally talked about this book and its positives. This was the first Stephen King book that I ever read, so it always holds a special place for me, and while I'll always prefer Stanley Kubrick's adaptation over the book, I cannot deny that this book is so important and is one of the greatest books of all time. Anyway, that's all I have for you today, and before you rage at me, about my previous statement, I will make a video describing why I prefer the movie over the book sometime in the future. I don't know when, could be a few months from now, could even be, yeah, who knows when, but one day that'll happen. And it's just an opinion, okay, the world isn't going to end just because I like a movie more than the book. I know, it's fine. Anyway, I'll see you later.